not a big deal.
Thank you.
So, all right, well, y'all have a good evening.
You too. Do you want to say goodbye
All right,
to Miss
take care.
Christie?
Bye, Luca.
All right, hang up on the phone. It's almost over. We're almost done.
Bye.
I want to call Papa. I want to call Papa, Mommy.
Yes, ma'am. Oh,
Tiffany? Hey, can you make sure that Simone Hilton has the login information? I sent it to her again.
I have it. I'm here, Amanda.
Oh, hey, Simone.
Hey, Amanda, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Love is Not Abuse Domestic Violence Prevention Safety Training hosted by Sheriff Patrick Pat Lamont and the Fulton County Sheriff Office. My name is Major Anita Frazier, and I am the commander of the Training Background and Recruitment Unit here at the Fulton County Sheriff Office. As we observe Domestic Violence Month, it is my pleasure to MC tonight's virtual training. Thank you for taking the time to join us to discuss domestic violence, including signs of unhealthy relationship and ways to protect yourself and your loved ones. First, before we start our virtual session, there are a few housekeeping rules that I must go over. First, in the virtual space is being recorded. Also, any information given out during this presentation will be given out offline after the presentation through the Fulton County Sheriff Office. Second, please respect everyone's time. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat box and we will all try our best to address them immediately following the training. So let's get right into it. Tonight, our sheriff is a little delayed, so we will start with our distinguished special guest, and we could not plan this event without having two key components here with us tonight, our district attorney office and our victim advocate. And tonight, our first speaker is Simone Hilton. She's with our Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Ms. Hilton is the Deputy District Attorney from the Brenda Bayham Domestic Violence Unit in the DA's office. Ms. Hilton, would you please give us a little information and background and your responsibilities at the DA's office as we touch on domestic violence tonight?
Sure, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Again, I am Simone Hilton and I do serve as the Deputy District Attorney of the Brenda Bayham Domestic Violence Unit. And this unit was created under the leadership of District Attorney Fonnie T. Willis under her current administration when she took office in January of this year. And the purpose or the reason behind this unit was specifically to focus on domestic violence crimes and having a team of lawyers, investigators, and advocates who could focus solely on these types of crimes, because we know that domestic violence cases have some nuances that other cases do not have. And so she wanted to have trained attorneys, trained investigators who can handle these types of cases. And the unit is actually named after Madam DA's family member who was killed in a domestic violence homicide. And so this unit handles cases that include felony, battery, family violence, aggravated assaults, aggravated batteries, domestic violence, sexual assaults, aggravated stalking with violent injuries, and domestic violence homicides. Now with our homicides, our unit is a little bit more expanded because it's more family violence, where our non-homicide cases solely focuses on intimate partner violence. And we handle cases irrespective of sex, gender, class, or socioeconomic status. So if it is an intimate partner case that is reported to law enforcement, and we will get that case here in this unit. Currently, our unit has approximately 325 open pending cases. That means there are approximately 325 defendants who are under indictment for a variety of domestic violence incidents like I just enumerated. However, the sad part of that is that 50 of those cases are domestic violence homicides. And unfortunately, we continue growing by the number. I believe I have about 10 to 12 in the pipeline to be indicted. And then we have about 600 unindicted domestic violence homicide cases that we're just trying to work through. And of course, because of the pandemic, it kind of delayed us being able to indict those cases, but we are slowly coming out of that at this time. So that's a little bit about our unit, what we do here. Like I said, we have victim advocates. One of our goals in this office is not just to prosecute cases, but to also make sure that our survivors are whole once we leave out the process. Because we know that life will continue for those individuals once the criminal justice process is over. And so we try to we're trying to build relationships with our community partners, like PADV and others, so that we can be able to transition our survivors from the criminal justice process to giving them the resources that they may need to survive and thrive after this incident or after these incidents have occurred to them.
Thank you, Ms. Hilton. Is there any driving passion for yourself why you took on representing being a DA's in a domestic violence unit? Is there any passion that really drives you when you're representing and seeking justice for our victims?
Definitely. You know, these are the cases where, you know, oftentimes because you love someone, you've been hurt, you've been injured, and you ultimately die. And prior to coming to this, back to Fulton County, I started my career as a prosecutor in Fulton County, but I left and did some time in another jurisdiction. That's when I really started doing domestic violence work and really had a passion for, I was experiencing young girls being murdered at the hands of their boyfriends. And when I say young, they could be my little sisters, my little cousins, 25, 24, 23, and 21. And I realized that was just life being taken too soon at the hands of a young man in those instances who was killing them for no reason. And that's where I really began to become passionate about this work and to continue doing this work.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Hilton, for that education on what the DAs do in their part to prosecute defenders of domestic violence and to protect our victims. I think for many people on this call, domestic violence, it matters, and this is why we're having this session, because it matters. Our next guest is from the advocacy side, and her name is Jill Sherling Allison, who manages legal advocate for Fulton County Partnership Against Domestic Violence. So Jill, if you could tell us a little bit about the advocacy part of it and the resources that are there for victims of domestic violence.
Yeah, so just to tell y'all a little bit about us, we are the first domestic violence agency that was in Georgia, and we're one of the largest in the country. And you know, there's just some statistics about the victims that we see on average. And then I wanted to talk about what programs we offer. So we do operate a 24-hour crisis line, 365 days a year. So if somebody's in crisis, they can always call. We run 2 emergency shelters. I always hate the name shelter. I like to call it safe house because I think shelter puts an image in people's heads and it's not like some other shelters may look like. But we run 1 in Gwinnett and 1 in Fulton County because we are actually cover both counties. And then we have children's services. And community support groups, and then our legal advocacy program, which is the one that I run for Fulton, is the Safe Families Office, which is located in the Fulton County Courthouse and is co-ran by us and Atlanta Volunteer Lawyer Foundation. And then also we offer supportive housing, we offer therapy, and all of our services are free of cost. And then we also have partnerships with family violence classes. And some of our preventative programs, we do offer a dating violence curriculum for prevention for a lot of high schools and some college. And then community outreach education. We have children and youth products. We also will come to workplaces and speak about domestic violence. And then we also train law enforcement and have a men's leadership program. And speaking of law enforcement, I know that, you know, we really appreciate the collaboration with the Fulton County Sheriffs, because you guys have been, you know, assisting and providing lifts for our clients lately to, you know, get to safety or get to a doctor or whatever they may need to get to. And so, yeah, the advocacy piece, so it's hard to say what that is, right? It can be so many different things. On the, you know, it's making sure that a survivor has whatever they need to get to the next step in life. So that could be, you know, helping assist with a restraining order. It could be, you know, providing long-term housing or helping with pay a utility bill. It's just, it's hard to narrow it down to one thing because it's so many things. But yeah, that's what we offer. And this is our 24-hour crisis line. Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Allison. I just have a question.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with advocacy and you're dealing with victims of domestic violence, are they often apprehensive about taking the resources of or getting the resources that they need?
For sure. For sure. For a lot of reasons, right? You love and care about this person. So that's difficult. so you already have that piece, right? You have a part built in about worrying about what's going to happen to that person. You have barriers, like if the person who provides, financial means for me and my children to survive is now going to no longer be a part of our life, through the criminal system, or, however, that can be a huge barrier for someone, to be able to leave. So yeah, definitely, victims on average leave 7 times before they leave for good. It's a pretty well-known statistic. So I think it's just letting, you have to let them, I think it's important to know that regardless, at least how we look at it as advocacy, we don't ever judge, and we don't ever, if I'm going to treat the same way when I see you on the 7th time as I did the first time. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jill, for that presentation on advocacy. And as you see, there's a 24-hour crisis line listed here for the many programs that is offered by Partnership Against Domestic Violence. Thank you so much for that presentation, Mrs. Allison. Next, we will have our Sergeant Calloway, which is one of our great instructors here at the Fulton County Training Office. When I reached out and talked to Sergeant Calloway about doing domestic violence, she was absolutely excited about it. And she kind of shared her story with me, being a young lady in college who having to suffer some form of domestic violence. So I thought it was fitting that she put the PowerPoint together so she can tell you her story, because each of us, whether we're in law enforcement, whether we're in the district attorneys, whether we're in advocacy, we have all came in contact with someone that has suffered from domestic violence, whether they are a woman or a man. And so I thought it was fitting when Sergeant Calloway told me her story, that she put this PowerPoint together. Now, with further ado, we're going to let Sergeant Calloway come in and talk about why domestic violence matter, why we're having this conversation, and provide some safety tips, and just to share her story and experience that she experienced in college as a young lady with domestic violence.
Good evening. Thank you, Major. Good evening, everyone. Yes, so as Major said, this seminar became very personal to me when she introduced and asked me to be a part of this. I was 19 years old in college. I was in my junior year of college. I was dating a guy, and I can say that I ignored all of the signs for someone of a perpetrator of domestic violence. I was beaten very badly. I had to be hospitalized for half a day, and the damage lasted very long time. I actually had to do counseling, a couple of therapy sessions, and just with family and that support and reaching out to those different resources given to me by the victim advocate in that district really helped me get myself back on track. So it helped me gain my power back. And now that I've came to the law enforcement side, I definitely understand and can empathize and sympathize with victims of domestic violence. So it's something very serious to me. It's something very close to my heart. And tonight I put together a brief presentation about domestic violence, signs and warning signs to look out for, as well as some safety tips that you can use to help guard yourself while you're out here. So we'll get right into it. I'll share my screen. 1 second. So first we'll start and we'll talk about what is domestic violence. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, it is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and/or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one's intimate partner against another. It includes physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and emotional abuse. The frequency and severity of domestic violence can vary dramatically. However, the one constant component of domestic violence is one partner's consistent efforts to maintain power and control over the other. It is also important to note that domestic violence does not always manifest as physical abuse. Emotional and psychological abuse can often be just as damaging as physical violence. Absence of physical violence does not mean the abuser is any less dangerous to the victim, nor does it mean that the victim is any less trapped by the abuse. When we look at Georgia law, OCGA 1913-1, it defines family violence as the means of the occurrence of one or more of the following acts between past or present spouses, persons who are parents of the same child, parents and children, step-parents and stepchildren, foster parents and foster children, or other persons living or formerly living in the same household. Any felony or commission of offenses of battery, simple assault, stalking, criminal damage to property, unlawful restraints, or criminal trespassing. The term family violence shall not be deemed to include reasonable discipline administered by a parent to a child in the form of corporal punishment, restraints, or detention. So we're going to further discuss why does this matter? Why is domestic violence important? I'll give you some statistical numbers. Every year, on average, there's 130 Georgia residents lose their lives to domestic violence. Georgia ranks 22nd in the nation for its rate of men killing women. 21% of women and 15% of men experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner during their lifetime. Also, there were 44,475 family violence incidents reported to law enforcement in 2018. Also in 2018, 68% of family violence victims in family violence incident reported to law enforcement were female. Between 2011 through 2020, 534, which is 35% of all domestic violence fatalities, were murder-suicides. In 2020, there were 95,839 crisis calls to the Georgia Certified Family Violence and Sexual Assault Agencies. The presence of guns in domestic violence situations increases the risk of homicide by 500%. 930 Georgians were killed by firearms in domestic violence incidents between 2010 and 2019. Let's talk about some characteristics of a healthy relationship. So in a healthy relationship, you care for one another and you do things for one another that shows that. You share activities you both enjoy. Decisions are made together, things that affect you both. You make decisions about things that are important to you. You're able to share your thoughts and feelings openly. You're respected and you trust one another. You're not afraid to do or say anything. You feel that you are able to just be yourself. On the contrary, characteristics of an unhealthy relationship. Force, either physical or psychological, is used to control you. You are not allowed to freely associate with people you care about. You need permission to do things you want to do. You must report where you've been, and you're faced with accusations that you've been somewhere else or you've been with someone else. Fun sometimes get carried away, and you are hurt by the end of that fun. You are criticized for what you wear and how you look or talk. You are verbally belittled. Your family or friends are criticized or made fun of. You are pressured to do things you do not approve of, morally, sexually, etc. You feel you can't even let your guard down or just be yourself. You're blamed for the abuse as if it's your fault. The power and control wheel here helps explain to us different characteristics of someone trying to facilitate physical violence or sexual violence against someone. The use of coercion or threats, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing and denying and blaming, using children, using male privilege, and using economic abuse. We'll go down this checklist to help you identify control issues within a relationship. First, we'll talk about privilege. Privilege, if you can check off any of these are considered to be some red flags that you may want to reconsider and basically pay attention to in these different types of relationships. When it comes to privilege, demands obedience like you are a servant, makes decisions without your input, treats you like you're inferior, tells you you can't cope, treats you like a child. Then we'll move to the sexual abuse. Withholds sex to punish you, pressures you to have sex, forces you to have sex against your will, pressures or forces you into unwanted sexual acts, treats you like a sex object. Physical abuse, threatens to turn people against you, leave the relationship, see someone else, take children away from you, leave you short of money, come after you if you leave, hurt or kill you and or your children, blames you for his or her problems, has someone to kill you, your family, friends, etc. Physical abuse, throwing something at you, pushes, grabs, or shoves you, pulls your hair, twists your arm, pins you to the floor, wall, or bed, chokes you. Physical abuse also says if you are kicked, hit, or punched, threatens you with a knife, gun, or other weapons, tries to run you down with a vehicle, physically and or sexually abuses children, harms or kills pets, deliberately deprives you of sleep. Isolation and restriction tells you that you can't do something, jealous about who you see, monitors your time, makes you account for where you were, does not allow you to leave the house, make it difficult for you to get a job, restricts your use of the car, tries to prevent you from contacting your family, alienates you from your family and friends, turns children against you, keeps you from getting medical care, withholds affections to punish you, tries to turn people against you. Economic abuse makes you account for all the money spent, keeps you short of money, makes you ask for basic necessities, undermines your attempts to improve your education, undermines your attempts to get or keep a job, controls the money, refuses to give you money, spends money only on things he or she wants, makes major decisions about money without consulting you. Emotional abuse says things to spite or insult you in front of others, puts you down about your physical appearance, makes you feel stupid or incompetent, criticizes your care of children or the home, calls you names and swears at you, tells you you are crazy or irrational, accuses you of having an affair, ridicules family or friends, does not show concern for children's needs or concerns, gets angry when children cry or make demands, goes through personal things, purse, drawers, pockets. Intimidation by sudden mood changes, gives the silent treatment, demonstrating anger, shouting or yelling, pounding fists on table, hitting walls, throwing or kicking something, stomping out of the room or house. If any of these items on these checklists you can check off that are characteristics of your relationship, please seek help. These are signs of abuse. Now let's get into some personal safety things that you can do at home, in your vehicle, and in public. At home, check exterior doors. Make sure that they have locks and deadbolt locks, and lock the knobs. Strike plates should be installed with 3-inch screws. All windows should have locks and anti-slide devices. Sliding glass doors should have anti-sliding devices. Don't leave ladders outside. This can be used to gain access into your home. Install motion sensing floodlights on the corners of the home. Shrubs and trees should be trimmed to the 3 to 9-inch rule and away from doors and windows. Don't hide keys outside. Let a neighbor or friend have those spare keys. Use a peephole or door viewer to see who's knocking. In your vehicle, when you're out, think about where you park. Park under streetlights or in a well-lit area. Pay attention to your surroundings when you're going to and from your car. Stay away from other parked vehicles and hiding spots. Stay off your phone and stay alert while going to your vehicle. Get your keys in your hand before you leave the store. Scan under, around, in your vehicle as you approach. If you think someone is following you, do not go straight home. Make random turns and see if they follow you, but do not get lost. If they're following you, drive to a precinct and call 911. Don't take help from strangers if you break down. Stay inside your car with doors locked and windows up. When using public transportation, elevators, stay near the buttons, back against the wall, find a stop button just in case there's an emergency. When walking or jogging, stay in well-lit public areas and do not get lost. Use the buddy system. Exercise with a friend. When using the ATMs, stay in well-lit populated areas. Put cash away fast and leave. If someone approaches you, cancel the transaction and leave. When you're dating, set boundaries early in the dating phase. Stay in the crowd. Avoid secluded locations. Avoid alcohol and drugs to stay alert. Be aware of date rape drugs. Watch your drink. Be made and keep it close. Arrange your own transportation. Be direct. No means no. Leave no question regarding your intent. Let someone know where you are. Drop your location to a friend or family member. By doing all these safety tips, you can stay safe as well as help those around you stay safe. We ask that you take anything that you've learned from this session and share it with friends and family members, and just share information just in case someone you know may be experiencing domestic violence. Here are some resources you can reach out to use. The Georgia Domestic Violence Hotline is a 24-hour hotline. The link is listed here. Partners of Domestic Violence, their link is there. The Georgia Commission on Family Violence, their link is here as well. These are some resources. There are hundreds of resources that are on the internet, as well as different agency and advocacy programs that are here to help victims of domestic violence and their families. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Sergeant Calloway, for that awesome presentation on keeping our community safe and our domestic violence safe. It is with great pleasure our Sheriff Patrick Labatt has joined us. I have the distinct honor of introducing our 28th Sheriff of Fulton County, Sheriff Patrick Labatt, and Sheriff is going to give us some insight from his perspective as our leader of the Fulton County Sheriff Office is why domestic violence matters.
Well, first of all, Thank you, Major Frazier, and certainly thank you, Jamil, for making this happen. Sarge, thank you for the meaningful insights. I think it important for us to note, while yes, I am the sheriff's office is tasked with making sure Fulton County is an elite place to work, live, and play. And that means our job is to focus on making sure people are comfortable and free from harm as much as we can. And certainly with October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we thought it important to figure out how to reach out to our communities, really talk about some of the ways that victimization occurs, how to protect each other, and certainly focus on some of the things that we offer. It's really, I found it as I became sheriff, one of the things that we do is serve temporary protective orders. And we certainly, it's a shame that in our society today, we receive anywhere from 15 to 30 temporary protection orders, or TPOs, on a daily basis. And for those that don't know, those TPOs can last anywhere from 30 to 60, 90 days, 6 months. Really depends on the severity of the case. Victims can certainly report any violations to any law enforcement agency. So it's important to note that although the temporary protection order is in place, sometimes you may be out of state, or you may be in another jurisdiction, but you can report any of those violations to any law enforcement agency from that perspective. And anyone that fails to follow that order can receive jail time because of it. So oftentimes our deputies are called on to not just explain the order, but to really intervene and try and provide a level of comfort in some cases, make sure that the conditions of the protective order are being followed. And that really comes with, and really we have to have a skill set that comes with compassion, and our team takes great pride in that. So oftentimes we get called, and we certainly want to really be responsive to the needs of those. We have a certain compassion level, if you will, especially when it comes to victims. So Sarge gave out some really great tips. It is certainly a pleasure, and I am honored to be the 28th sheriff of Fulton County. Certainly our team has really focused and been laser focused on holding those accountable that do harm to our persons in our community, or our community as a whole. So again, thank you all. I appreciate it, and I look forward to the time that we can meet in person and have these conversations in a non-virtual manner.
Thank you, Sheriff, for taking the time out to share that information with us. I think domestic violence is something that is important. I think each of us on this call and here has shared those moments with someone that has been abused, whether it's been a male or female. If there are any questions at this time, we will take questions. If anyone would like to ask questions specifically to resources, but as a person that has been in law enforcement for 32 years, there's a short story that I would like to share. When one of my sergeants, we were talking about a domestic violence case, and he talked about being put in action. There was a mother who had sent her children here in the States, I believe it was 4 of them, with their father, and the children had called and were complaining that the father was abusing them, and she was trying to get here from Jamaica. The sergeant had had interaction with this gentleman before, and so he went to the home on a domestic violence call related, and his instinct told him to go ahead and remove the children. He made contact with the mother. She said that she would be on a flight that night. However, before we could end the shift, we received another call at the location, and that father had not only killed himself, but he had killed each of his children. So when someone express a matter that they are being abused, we have to take that information seriously. And laws have changed over the years as related to domestic violence. I know one of the most precedented laws that happened within the last 3 years or so. I believe it was the new strangulation law. And Mrs. Hilton, I would like to ask you a question. Are there any updated and new laws or information that are in the works related to domestic violence since the new strangulation law came into effect related to domestic violence?
I think one of the biggest laws that came out, and I want to say last year or so, is when they changed when law enforcement arrives on the scene, who they should arrest, and not the primary aggressor, but the predominant aggressor. Because what we were finding was sometimes when law enforcement would go out to the scene and maybe there might be evidence of both parties being having some type of injury, then we would arrest both parties and figure it out later. But now there has to be an analysis for who's the predominant aggressor, who's the person who has an ongoing abusive relationship with the other individual. And sometimes it might not be the initial aggressor for that particular incident. And I think that's just been very helpful in really determining, because oftentimes, sometimes we find that because survivors have to defend themselves, we were finding that survivors were sometimes being arrested. And when you look at the case and you look at the totality of the circumstance and you look at everything that's going on with these two individuals, that maybe on this particular incident, she was the initial aggressor, but she might not have been he or she may not have been the predominant aggressor. And so that has been one of the upcoming changes. And I believe that was in, this 2020 COVID year has kind of, probably I think 2019
Yes.
is when, and maybe Jill coming, but I think that was 2019, maybe early 2020, when that was passed. So that was definitely helpful for us here. So that's something that I'm familiar with.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Allison, how can people help and assist your program with domestic advocates? Because I know there are a lot of times there are resources that are needed. I had the pleasure of years ago when I worked with the city visiting a domestic violence shelter, and we were taking gifts and supplies and trying to really connect with some of those families there. And I met a mother who was there at a shelter, and she was really afraid that her significant other or boyfriend would find out where she and the kids was. So how important is to protect the victims, and what can we do as a community to assist your program for advocacy to make sure resources are provided to the community?
I can always say, sometimes people will do drives, which are amazingly helpful. So like drives for diapers are always needed. Anything that the women may need, cleaning supplies, or the men may need, because we also do house men. And also, as far as keeping people safe, it's gotten so much harder now because of just the internet and tracking on the phone. So yeah, that's always a concern of ours, is keeping our safe house, hidden. It is a misdemeanor to ever give out the address. So just so that's clear to people. Yeah, I would say definitely, and also volunteering. We can always use volunteers, especially with the pandemic. It just seems like the numbers have risen so much, and our clients' needs have really risen. Because if you think about it, you've got, this domestic violence, now people lost jobs and all, it's just added more and more fuel to a fire. So definitely, we can definitely always use volunteers. We have more cases than we have manpower for sure. So volunteers have been really helpful, and interns, with keeping our programs going.
Thank you, Ms. Allison. That was a great point. During COVID, it would be interesting to know, I found it in law enforcement that our domestic calls went up because people were at home, kind of, I guess, locked down together. So DA Hilton, did you see or notice a rise in domestic violence cases during the pandemic?
Yes, I mean, you have to, we were calling it the pandemic in the pandemic. Because, unfortunately, when you're at home, you can't report to anyone. You can't leave the home. Now you're stuck at home with an abuser, and the tension is rising. And you're afraid to leave because you don't want to go. So the numbers have surely increased during the pandemic. And unfortunately, we saw, I think, an increase in our homicide cases during the pandemic. So unfortunately, given what was happening, not just even with domestic violence cases, but when you brought us a family violence with kids being abused, because they can't go to school to report to mandatory reporters. Mandatory reporters can't see them, see any injuries. And so a lot of it was being hidden because of the pandemic.
I'm glad you mentioned kids. How does that work with kid victims, both in the prosecution stage and in the advocacy stage? When we have kids that are being abused, how does that work in the prosecution stage as well as the advocacy stage? Ms. Hilton, you can start off, and Ms. Allison, you can finish. When we have to deal with children.
So we often, when we have to deal with when we have child victims, even initially with law enforcement, we don't interview them directly. We take them to a forensic interviewer who is specialized in how to speak with children and how to talk and interview children. Because like I tell all the time, lawyers, like I tell my victim advocates, you guys are like the mushy and the soft ones. We try to get to the point and try to get to the facts. So we might not always be best suited to initially interview our children, but we often use our resource at GCCA, with Georgia Center for Child Advocacy, or
Absolutely.
other, the Stephanie Blank Center, just a variety of different centers who have trained forensic interviewers who will interview our children. And then when it's time for the full prosecution of the case, so after law enforcement has finished the investigation, turn that case over to us, then we will meet with the children, oftentimes with our victim advocates, multiple times. So we try to make our children feel just comfortable in knowing who we are. So we usually meet with our victims ideally about 3 times before we even go into a courtroom. And the first time is often just getting to know them and having them get to know us. And we're not even talking about the facts of the case because it can be so horrific.
Right.
But it's really just trying to get the children to know who we are and making them comfortable with us.
Right.
Yeah, and on the advocacy side, like Ms. Hilton said, we have a lot of specialists who specialize in that, who we really refer to too, but we also have our own child advocates who work with them. We have a teen program too that works especially with teens. I'm gonna turn my video off real quick because can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Let me try this. For some reason, it works better when the video goes off. But yeah, so we have children advocates who work with all of our children who are in shelter on a weekly basis, meet with them, and we also offer, connect all of our children victims with therapy and specialists who work in issues around children.
Thank you, Allison. I could say from a law enforcement perspective, arriving on a scene of domestic or any type of abuse with a child, it takes it sometimes takes a special officer to really kind of get to the meat of the crime, to really draw it out. And you have to be specific with a detailed report. One of the hardest things for me in law enforcement that I've worked as a child that had to be transported to Egleston, and there was no information. And as the child was in the ICU, I remember the doctor coming out and say, Sarge, what happened to the child? I can't tell you because I just arrived at the hospital. But we had a really great special victims team that really kind of got into the meat of the investigation and took the necessary steps. And so from my perspective, it was making sure the officer did a very detailed report and left no stone unturned to make sure that the uncle at the time that did the abuse, and which was a special needs child, justice was sought by our DA's office at that particular time. So it can be very demanding in an advocacy position as well as a prosecuting position because of the cases and having to review the files that are so horrific when it relates to domestic abuse or any type of abuse. But thank you, everyone, each of you, for being on this call tonight. Thank you, DA Hilton. Thank you, Mrs. Allison. And thank you, Sergeant Calloway, for the insight and the safety tips on keeping our community safe and things to look out for. If anyone have any questions that we did not answer tonight or any information we did not provide, you can please email us at the Fulton County Community Outreach website, and that website is fcso.communityoutreach@fultoncountyga.gov. Also, we are hiring and we have a job fair on November the 13th, which is going to be at our North Annex Service Center, November the 13th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please go to our website. We are hiring and we are offering hiring bonuses. Please follow us on our social media at Fulton County Sheriff, and for our latest news at the Fulton County Sheriff Office. Thank each and everyone who joined us tonight, and have a safe Halloween and have a good night.